Hello and welcome to Worst Quality Crab, a podcast of Asian American stories and recipes from best quality hearts. I'm your host, Freesia Lee. Joining me as always is my husband and producer, Sam.
Hello.
And on this episode, we have our guest, Brian. Brian is a person who makes art currently based in San Francisco, and his work explores the contradictions and humor of everyday beliefs and gestures. Hi, Brian.
Hi, I'm excited to be here.
We're excited to have you.
I might be the first Gen Z guest, so I'm excited. I'm excited to break that ground for this space.
How young are you? I did not know that.
I am unfortunately 25.
Oh my God. You are? Oh, congratulations. We should get you a trophy.
I'll be the first, hopefully not the last.
Not the last. No. I have some actually in mind. But if we're honest, I was like, oh my God, can I have Gen Z? Will I know how to relate? Am I gonna just hardcore mom them? Will they even see me? Like,
yeah, am I just a ghost to them?
Am I a ghost to you? Do you? I'm an old mother. Like, do you just see right through me as society does?
I'm technically cusp, and my sisters who are 10 years older, I was also raised on their content. So I do feel deeply connected to a millennial root.
Great.
Just a little spicy Gen Z here and there.
I'll take that. As long as like you have a tie, then there's some middle ground that we can meet on.
Yeah.
Okay. It's beautiful.
That's our bridge.
Oh, love that for all of us. Wait, but I want to go back to a thing. I read your bio as you gave it to us straight up. We'll get into food. Brian, you called yourself a person who makes art, and I would like to call you an artist.
Thank you.
How about that?
I think I struggle with the title artist because I think growing up, I didn't know a lot of artists like practicing, but I would go often to like art museums. And so the idea of quote unquote like making it, which I understand as an adult now is not the process, but the idea of like quote unquote being an artist was kind of like being a baker. It's like, oh, you work at a bakery, so you're a baker. Or it's, oh, if you're an artist, you have work in a museum. And so but anyone else who has that kind of a similar background to me, like I'll call them an artist, but I always have the hardest time calling myself one.
I had a similar realization, I guess, when I was a fresh adult. Like a ex-girlfriend I had, her dad was an artist and he was like a regular 9-to-5 guy as well. He showed me like the garage where he made all his paintings and stuff like that. And I was like, and it just clicked in my brain. I was like, oh, you can be an artist. You don't have to be like well established in the art world with gallery openings and pieces in the museum to be an artist. Like he had all these paintings. He was an artist. There's no doubt about it. You just be anybody that's creative and making stuff.
I'll just chime in to say that art doesn't have to be the thing that pays your bills for you to be an artist.
Right. Exactly.
That is a capitalist lie. Fuck that. If you make art and you do, you're an artist. Also, Brian, I have seen your art on Instagram, but albeit, but I've seen it and it's art. You're an artist. End of story. Anyway.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
This is your pep talk from your old millennial new mom.
Yeah, sister,
right. Your new, very old millennial number one sister. Anyway, food. We're here to talk about food. This is so fun. We're all just a little bit bonkers, mostly me. Brian, I'm so excited for you to talk about your dish because I really want to eat it.
Let's do it.
Yeah, why don't you tell us what dish you're bringing, who was making it, where were you eating it, are you still eating it, all of the things.
So the dish that I am bringing to today is Kalua Pig or Kalua pork. And it's this like shredded pulled pork, kind of like what you would get at like a barbecue joint, just without any of the barbecue sauce. And it originates from Hawaii. So my dad was born there. But traditionally, I think Kalua is a cooking style. And so it's Kalua pork, which means you basically kind of have this big pit called an imu that you fill with hot coals, rocks, and leaves. And you throw the pig in. And for a luau or a big party, you just eventually kind of take this whole community event, put this pig in, take it out when it's ready, and it is so tender. It's not the easiest thing to do on like a Monday like evening if you're trying to cook. So our family's version is made out of a crock pot with liquid smoke and sea salt. And so it's been a fun kind of little balance of, it takes kind of some of those, the origins come from a more traditional space, but the way that it's created today is, really laid back. But growing up, it was super interesting because our dad is our connection to Hawaii, but I always remember my mom making it. And it always ended up becoming kind of like a family event to do. So, right, as I said before, it used to be like this, or it is this big thing to celebrate. But when we're making out of a crock pot, it's funny how many people are involved, even though it's like you just set it and forget it. And so, like, whenever we do it, like somebody the night before would get the crock pot from the basement. Then our mom, who wakes up the earliest, would put it in. And then when it came down to like who was going to taste test and shred the meat and do all those kind of finishing touches, it was always like a kid or one of the kids doing it. And so I always think it's like one of those foods that I associate as like a community event, even though the whole function of putting in a crock pot is so that it's the easiest thing possible. But yeah, I don't think I've ever made Kalua Pig with less than like 3 people on hand.
That's really cute, actually. What age do you think you started shredding this?
Ooh.
I'm asking from a purely practical, like, what age can I get my kids involved standpoint.
Well, there's 2 different roles that I loved. It's the shredding, and then there's the taste tester role. So I think taste tester role was like a 5 or 6, and then shredding, you have to be a little more dexterous, so maybe 7, 8. But there was something really nice about like when you're asked to be a taste tester, it's somebody asking for your opinion. And also validating that, right? When you are that person, it's saying like, hey, like, especially as a child, that's so beautiful to hear.
Oh,
Your opinion is important, and like, yeah, that's a role that you can have, and it doesn't feel negligible. But I remember my mom saying like, oh yeah, do you want to taste this? And having a sense of pride. Be like, oh yeah, she trusts my flavor profiles, or like the way I taste was so cute.
that's really sweet, actually. And now I feel bad that we don't ask our kids to taste things and we just put it in front of them and expect them to eat. Ah, fuck. Are we not parenting as well as we think we are? Crap.
Well, I'm also an extremely picky eater, or at least was. So I think this was a safe space, and I think the narrative I'm building is not accurate to my everyday pickiness coming out. Having to eat like baby shrimp on cabbage and like not vibing.
Baby shrimp on cabbage.
Okay, maybe that wasn't a universal thing. That was...
No, I'm gonna say like I just based off of that, I don't know that I'm vibing with baby shrimp on cabbage either. So you're maybe fine, and you weren't that picky.
Thank you. That's a really validating call.
I have questions about that, but we'll come back to that. Kalua pork. Okay, so you said it's a slow thing, like it's a crockpot thing. You're obviously not digging a pit for this, but was it still like a weeknight? Like how often was your mom making this?
So we would make it maybe once, once or twice a month.
Okay.
But mostly what we enjoy doing it is for like big family holidays. So Thanksgiving is my family's holiday to cook. And so Kalua Pig's always there. Or if we're bringing it to our cousin's house, it was always nice to bring it somewhere. My family's ethnically Chinese. And so it was always nice, especially because all of my family, my dad's sides, almost always all of them are still in Hawaii or the West Coast. Growing up in Massachusetts, it was something that you could bring to a place that felt like a special item, right? It's not something you could readily get at a restaurant near us. And it wasn't your traditional Chinese food. So it felt like this weird kind of like in-between space.
That's awesome. There's no lead-in question here because I already know this, but I have to ask.
Go for it.
You are a twin and you have another set of twins in your family that are older.
Yeah.
That's not a question. It's just my mind cannot, as a parent of 3 even, my mind cannot comprehend what that was like. Both as child or parent, like as an only child, that's bonkers to me. As a mom, that's also bonkers to me. Please tell me about this. And like, what was mealtime like with 4 but 2 sets? Just help me out.
Yeah, it was super interesting. So I'm an identical twin. And then I have 2 sisters who are also twins, and they're around 10 years older. And so it was really weird growing up kind of like with 3 moms. Because the expectation, right? A lot of times people have this idea of like what an older sibling, particularly an older sister is. I feel like our situation was like that on crack, where they had to like really step up. in that way. So I feel really fortunate that I kind of grew up in that situation. But then when it came down to meal times, it kind of felt like everybody had a role to like set up the table. So I remember like mine was like scooping the rice. And I felt like really good about that. And everyone had their like assigned seats to go to. And it is funny to kind of see how, not like politics, but like the internal kind of structure of the home ends up, emphasizing when it comes down to mealtime.
Oh, say more.
Of just like, I feel like the way that, everybody's like roles in the home life either trickle or find a different nuanced space in the cooking time. So, for example, like our dad, who had cancer when we were younger, couldn't work and had a lot of like physical disabilities. But one place that he could provide was picking us up from school every day and also cooking. So even though Kalua Pig is something that he brought to our space, and I think physically because it was like so heavy to lift, it wasn't something that he would do. But for almost every other meal, that's something that he would provide. And then I think a lot about how my brother and I, because we were so much younger, the expectation was our sisters would pay for everything, right? Or would like take us around. And so as we've gotten older, the one space that was kind of empty was like, we can cook. And this is our place to contribute to the family unit. And so it's like, it's like thinking about the places that we eat as like another space that takes like the home politics and then puts it back into like a smaller area, which plays by different rules sometimes. And it's been weird now living on my own and not having that.
Oh, yeah. What's that like to go from eating with so many children or siblings and now an adult and feeding yourself?
Well, I hate leftovers. I know that's not a great thing, but cooking for one is horrible because you're basically only eating leftovers. And then it's like you don't get that kind of community element of cooking. And so you're just kind of like, I like eat like a boy. I am a boy, but like I eat like a boy now. Where it's like I'll just eat like chocolate covered pretzels for dinner and like a can of like beans that I've roasted. And it's like, and I was like, I'm better than this. Like I am well educated, right? I enjoy cooking. But then ever since I've moved out, I've like, my love for cooking has definitely changed. And it is interesting. I didn't realize how much I associated it with like family and community until not necessarily always being around that.
Yeah. So I take it you are not making Kalua pork for yourself in a large crock pot.
I am not, but I just got an Instant Pot, so I think I will try using it.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, could you do this in an Instant Pot and make it even faster?
Yeah, just do it in like 4 hours, or like honestly 25 minutes and be done.
What is it about leftovers that turns you off to them?
I think partially it's like a textural thing, right? Because it's like when you're eating. So I don't know. Did you guys eat family style growing up?
Yes, I did.
Kind of, or was like everything plated for you when you like sat down?
I was more plated.
Okay,
Sam was definitely family style.
So I grew up.
Still is.
So I grew up on the family style kind of like method of eating. So like we'd have a bowl of rice and then you just put whatever like was sitting in the middle. Which is interesting is like eventually you end up eating everything together because it just kind of like all mixes. But that's not necessarily how it was made, and that's not necessarily how you eat it in the moment. And that's how it looks at the end. But I think once you have that leftovers, once everything's been like mushed together and then reheated and served to you, it just feels like a different experience for me.
Oh, huh.
Is that weird? I can't know if that makes sense.
No, I'm actually having my own. This is interesting. Oh, I'm in my own shit over here about when we like bring home leftovers from like, big Chinese family dinner or whatever, or post New Year leftover, and then I like make my one plate that's like scoop of rice and then a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this. I don't like it as much. And maybe this is why. Because you're right, like that is not how I would eat it in the moment from the table. Like I would have my rice and then I would like pick up one or two things and eat those and then pick up another thing and eat. And Brian, you have given me something to think about. This is interesting. Did not see this coming for myself.
But I do feel differently when it comes to like non-Chinese food leftovers or like non-pan AAPI food. Because I feel like Thanksgiving leftovers when you're eating like white people food, it is so good.
Well, that is a thing that you do eat, and like you just pile it on the plate and then you sort of like eat it little bit, little bit, little bit.
Yeah, but I don't know if it's just the power of gravy, but there's like is something about just
Yes.
like nuking it all and it just becomes like this weird pile, but I love it.
Yeah, it's the least photogenic food,
Yeah.
but the best sort of all smushed together. That's true. Sorry, I want to go back to Kalua pork. What were you eating this with besides rice, if anything? Or was it just like pile of rice, pile of pork?
So if you go to a restaurant, oftentimes you'll have it with cabbage. And then I think more traditionally it's eaten with poi. Because we didn't have access to poi and I'm not the biggest cabbage person, like we've always just made it with rice. And then as like a leftover option to kind of zhuzh it up, my sister now makes it with, she turns it into like an omelet.
Oh.
So she'll do like a spinach, egg, and Kalua Pig combo.
Nice.
But yeah, it's mostly pretty plain. And I think like what is interesting is it also doesn't have like an origin or like flavor profile wise, you can't really pinpoint it anywhere. It's like pork, salt, and smoke.
Oh yeah.
And so it does pair really well. It's like if you want to turn to like tacos the next day, you can do that. Or like, yeah, you can eat it with rice. You can eat it. I love it on mashed potatoes. But there is something about the versatility of that. And that also might be why I like it so much. Oh my God, Kalua Pig nachos.
Oh, nice. It's just like 100% savory. Like it goes with anything.
But so that's been an interesting thing of like, yeah, as you grow up and like you have more access to different flavors, I feel like we have been using Kalua pork and eating it in different ways than we used to just growing up. Because it used to, yeah, basically just be rice and whatever vegetable we would make at the time.
What was your shredding technique?
Oh.
And has it evolved as you've grown?
So I think as a slowly reforming picky eater, I just got into chicken wings as of late.
Okay.
So shredding was really fun because you got to remove all of the fat. You got to remove any pieces that looked a little questionable. And you also removed all the bone. And so it was kind of a picky eater's dream because you're basically making it a safe place. It's like Minesweeper. You're making the meal a safe place to eat. And so it's 2 forks, a big bowl for like anything you want to discard, and then you have like a big ladle because sometimes there's a lot of liquid. But you like, I start with the big pieces first. Also, sorry if this is really boring, but you start with like the big
you
pieces.
You called it
like,
Minesweeper. This is perfect.
Yeah, to set the scene, you start with the big pieces of like fat or the visible ones that you can remove first because it's your safest bet. And then once you've removed as much as that, you slowly go in and you tear. And you know, when you start tearing open, also sorry if you're vegan or vegetarian, but you start tearing open the flesh and you can just like tell immediately if it's going to be like little veins and bits or if it's going to be like a safe space. So you just kind of like slowly go through. And then because my mom is an immigrant, anything that we've discarded, we save in a bowl and then we look over that again to make sure that there's nothing that we've missed that we potentially could eat. We put it in.
Awesome.
So it's a multi-process step, but it does feel really intense. I feel like I have a headache after because like my eyes are squinted the whole time.
Oh my God.
My body's hunched.
This explains why you were doing the shredding at maybe like an 8 or 9 years old and not.
Yes, you need the dexterity.
Yeah. That would surely go overlooked by our 6-year-old.
Do you think your kids would be interested?
I do think they would be interested, actually. Probably the 6-year-old more than anybody. She seems the most interested in cooking, although the older one is getting there, and I'm trying to work on like teaching her a few things that she could like, if for whatever reason she were ever needed to feed herself. Not that that should ever happen because she's not old enough to be home alone. But just like, here's how you make rice. Here's how you make tuna salad. Here's how to make ramen. Be careful.
Yeah.
Things like that.
I'm really curious to see what their personalities are going to look like in a kitchen setting, like when it's just them cooking, like all 3 of them.
Just them is an interesting caveat to that. I think when it's with us, it is very much their regular personalities of like the oldest one being kind of careful and like meticulous, and then the middle one just being like, whatever. Let's toss some cheese powder in that. And, you know, it lands where it lands. But by themselves is a good question. I don't know.
Because I'm always curious, especially like being the youngest. I feel like I'm sometimes I act differently when I know like a parent is around or like an older sibling is around, because you also your responsibilities are less, right? Because you know you have people looking over for you. But the moment it's like just you in a space or you're the one that's like leading, it is interesting to see what elements come out.
What have you noticed for yourself, Brian?
I think I balance this weird thing about like being mature, but also like an extreme child at the same time. And not necessarily in an immaturity way, but in the sense of like play. And so I think when I'm in a family setting, which I love doing, I just feel a lot goofier sometimes, because you can just like, the way that I cook is like making jokes or like bopping around here and there. And then I feel like I kind of run a sweatshop when it's just me, or like I'm the one that's leading through, because then you have more control, right? You can say what you're doing and you can give feedback.
But maybe that's why you just eat pretzels and beans, because you're forcing yourself into sweatshop labor when it's just you. Like, what if you just had more fun when you cooked for one?
Yeah, maybe I'll put some music on. But it's also maybe it's also an interesting thing of like, I feel like the art background's wild, because it's like when you're making food, you also get feedback like from others, because it's like the intention is to like make other people smile, or like you want them to have a good experience. It's beyond just cooking to eat. And then I feel like when I'm cooking for myself, I'm just cooking to eat.
Brian, no.
I know, it's not good.
Your art is for you too. Your cooking art is for you too. Look at me. Look at me.
I'm looking at you.
Look at me. Listeners, we look at each other when we do this. You should make a plate that you would love to serve to someone else, just to serve to yourself. It tastes so much better. It's so much more satisfying. I say this as a person who, only in the summertime, when there's basil and fresh tomatoes, I'm like, I will make a plate and I'll be like, oh my God, this is so beautiful. I should show this to a person. And then I text my friend and she's like, oh, kudos. Bon Appetit magazine. I'm like, yes. And then I eat it and I feel great. I need you to do that.
I will try. I'm going to write it down. How do you guys find the time to do that? Especially when it's like, there's like, especially as a parent, right, to cook is to provide in that way.
It's honestly mostly like lunchtimes when we're eating different things, or I'm by myself or whatever. It's not kid meals.
Does that change your relationship to lunch now that like that's the space?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it does change my relationship to lunch. It's the space where I'm only responsible for me, especially when I'm like making lunch to bring to work. I'm mostly only responsible for me, or Sam and I will like, kind of make something together. But it's a time where I don't have to think about anybody else. I can take as much or as little time as I need. In some ways, it's sort of like I can take more time and space, and also sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm short on time today. Like, it's just utility, eat whatever I need. And I know that I'm not going to complain about it. So I'll just eat it and I'll be like, oh, you know what? I'll get it again tomorrow. Like, that's when I'll do the nicer one, or, have more of a plan or whatever. So it's kind of this paradoxical, like, I have more time for myself and I can like take that space, and also I can make it that much more like, utilitarian, just a protein shake or whatever, because it's just me. I just have to like feel myself sometimes.
I think for me, it's definitely like, oh, I can make this spicy if I wanted to. I could like add kimchi here, or make it a little saltier than I would. It doesn't have to be like a chicken nugget. Or like a plain pasta.
Well, and then how did you guys like rewrite, especially I feel like with Asian communities, the idea of like doing something for yourself and being selfish is a really fine line. Like, at least the way that I grew, like narrative wise, I kind of felt that way. How do you now find that space to like do things for yourself as a way to like, I'm treating myself and that's a fair thing to do, and not necessarily like feeling the guilt behind that sometimes?
That's a really great question, Brian. How do we do that? I mean, I guess part of it is just knowing that like that is a narrative that so many people grew up with, and I don't even know that I've necessarily like recognized that as one that I grew up with, but I just, before we became parents, someone was like, I want to do a bunch of stuff and get it all out of the way so that when I have kids, like I can devote everything to them. And I was like, oh, that sounds good.
Like live a life, like a full life before. Well, that's so sad.
Yeah. Yes, no. And I was like, that sounds sure. Yeah, that makes sense. And then I became a parent and I was like, no, that's terrible. I cannot like devote myself fully to this small human and like completely lose all of me. And so I think from, not day one, but early enough on, I was like, well, I have to still like be a human and be like a person. And some of that, is going to mean like when it comes to food or cooking, like we're going to eat separate things or I'm going to have to take care of my needs first. And then eventually, like, I think it wasn't until maybe the second kid where I was really like, the boundary has to stay or like I have to be better about it. Because if I don't, I'm actually a worse parent. And so it stopped being about like, oh, this is not even selfish, but it's like, it stopped being about like, I was doing this selfish thing or like self-centered thing or whatever. And it was like, I have to do this. Otherwise, I am terrible to them. Like if I am not fed, if I am not hydrated, if I am not, rested enough, or if I just haven't had enough, like whatever I need, I'm a terrible mom or just like not the mom that I want to be. And so, kind of recognizing that for myself and being like, you know what, it's important for me that I like take one afternoon out with friends or I like cook the thing that I want to cook and eat. Or that I just say like, I need to go away from you and go eat something for 5 minutes because I haven't eaten all day so that I could actually show up in the way that like was closer to how I wanted to be. And then, in that regard, it is like for them.
I think for me, growing up as a latchkey kid and being on my own and cooking for myself for a long time, I don't know if this is related to your original question, but I was like, now that I have to cook for kids, it doesn't feel like a burden most of the time. It's just like, oh, I get to make the thing and I get to see other people react to it now too. It's not just me. And I usually get some sort of pleasure from that. Sometimes it's like a negative reaction and that's not fun. But I think just kind of being on my own for so long, it's been a refreshing change to like do this thing for other people and not just be by myself and think of my own self all the time.
Yeah, it's kind of like the performance of cooking.
Yeah.
Which is wild to think about it in that way.
To Sam's point about being a latchkey kid, like, were you coming home to like after school snacks? You had older sisters? Were they kind of like picking you up? You said your dad was picking you up. Like, what was it like for you? And also, second question, answer them in any order.
Okay.
You grew up in Massachusetts where Kalua pork was like really not a thing. And it sounds like, I'm going to say maybe being Asian was not so typical. What was that like? And what was it like at lunch for you?
I'll start with the lunch portion. So I was always a fan of lunch because we would always get cafeteria food. And I think it also is partially like a picky eater thing, but I do think often of like, yeah, it was so processed, but everything had its own place and it was so different from, not that we didn't eat non-Asian food at home because we did quite often, but it was nice to just like, yeah, you didn't have to think about it. It was like warm. It was like mushy when you wanted it to be mushy. But what was super interesting is like a lot of the books that we like read growing up about like accessible ways to talk about Asian identities was through food. And so it was an interesting thing. Like I didn't necessarily feel like I experienced that, even though that was the kind of narrative that was taught to me in like the amount of books. Did you ever read Yoko?
No.
It's this Japanese cat. She's very cute. And she brings like her box lunch and then gets bullied for it. Or we had a book called The Chasyu Bao Boy, where he like brings his lunch and then he gets bullied for it and then everyone eats it and they love it. And so I feel like, yeah, conversations about like being accepting was often centered around that. And I just feel like I didn't have that experience growing up, but I don't know how much of that was by choice too.
Oh, interesting. This is where our respective age gaps are showing because you had a childhood in which there were conversations around accepting identity and there were books about it and it was through food. Whereas I'm going to say, and part of why we started this whole thing in the first place was like, there was none of that when we were kids. Like,
did you have Tikki Tikki Tembo? Like, who was your...
I mean, yes, but also no. I mean, that's like existed for a long time. Can we just drop in the clip of
Oh, Sabrina Wu?
Sabrina Wu.
In the United States, there is a critically acclaimed, widely taught children's book I was forced to read 9 million times, Tikki Tikki Tembo. The first sentence of that book is, there once was a Chinese boy named Tikki Tikki Tembo. No saw Rembo, cherry berry ruchi, pip berry pembo. No, there wasn't.
So good. It's so good. Yes, I guess that was a thing, although I didn't like really think about it. I guess I'm just in generational awe that you had that growing up, and I love that for your generation.
I don't know how much of that was practiced, but it was it was published in a book that was accessible.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's great. What are our kids going to have? Is it even going to be a conversation? I don't really know. It's hard to say.
Well, it's also West Coast versus East Coast too, I feel like is really different.
That's true.
In the way that you can experience it.
That's very true.
Say more.
I think like growing up a lot of times like the narrative of what it meant to be East Asian, and particularly Chinese, was super specific. I think oftentimes you had a lot of kids who were first generation, and so at their home lives were more of the things that you kind of traditionally talk about as what it means to be Chinese. And so it felt weird to go to school and those kind of be your safety people and also still not be able to relate to a lot of those conversations. And so what that means for identity was always interesting, because then our dad was from Hawaii. And so we could always sprinkle in a little bit of like, oh, we're Chinese, but my dad's born from Hawaii, right? Or my dad's from here. And so it was a way to kind of add that kind of asterisk to then have, give yourself some format of validity to be like, oh yeah, we're not like them. We're like this. And somehow that, otherizing yourself in that way to feel like you had validity in your existence is something that I still don't know how to properly unpack. But I remember like growing up conversationally, that's something that I would always try to mention. It was like, I'm Chinese, but.
Right.
Because I don't think, especially people who have been to both, everyone's like, ooh, Hawaii. No one's like, ooh, China. And there's just like this weird, right? You're also playing into that mysticism of like what it means, like, and like tourism and vacation, right? It's like, it's framed as this really beautiful space, and it is. But I remember it feels weird to also kind of use that as a way to differentiate oneself, even though you know that's not always appropriate.
Yeah. No, I get that. I mean, sort of in the same vein, not exactly, like I'm half white. And so I think that there was a certain amount of like growing up for me and for a few other people I know, like being Hapa was like, oh, actually this mostly happens from strangers when they like look at me and they're like, oh, are you Asian? I'm like, oh yeah, I am, but I'm half white or whatever. And they're like, oh, I could tell, like you look so exotic. And I'm like, I don't love this, but like I think you mean it as a compliment. And so,
did you always feel that way when you heard that?
That I didn't love it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know how I felt about it when I was like very little, because also it would have been wild if people were saying shit like that to me when I was like 5. But I don't think I've ever liked it. And I think just because like for me, I've never really felt enough of either one of them to like really like lean in one way or the other. So no matter who was saying it, it was always just sort of like, oh, okay, like Asian people being like, oh, I could tell from your eyes, but I'm like, oh, creepy, gross. Or like from white men, you're like, oh, I could tell you look exotic. Like, no, that's not.
That's not cute.
That's not it either. So I'm
curious with like a Hapa identity. Do you feel as though like your relationship with it felt like two halves that you could then blend? Because like I don't have another side to pin something on in terms of like feelings.
You don't, but like I feel like this like connection to Hawaii is
a proxy for that.
Yeah, it's kind of a proxy for that. Like they're sort of, you know, in the, not that being from Hawaii is like this whole other thing. I mean, I guess it is if you're native Hawaiian, right? But like to me, it feels like you kind of like felt similarly of like, oh, I have this other thing that I could jump onto or people could say about me that will differentiate me. Could I blend the two? I don't know. I'm like trying to think of a time in my life of like where to start this, but I just like I remember being with my white cousins and aunt and uncle and like being at a thing, and it was like, and I was like a little kid, so like very literal. But it was like, oh, you know, like adults and family or something, and I was like, oh, but I'm Chinese, like I don't look like you, like we're gonna have to pay extra for me or whatever. Some like dumb thing because I didn't understand that, like, you know, kids are free. Like all the kids in the family didn't really matter. Or then also being in middle school and having like Asian friends and then also white friends and like not straddling those very well. And also because it was like a time of grunge and like all the white friends were into grunge and I was like, oh, that's not for me. So I really don't know how to be in that space. But then also having like all these very tiny Asian friends, like very petite, and just me being like, I'm 5 inches taller than everybody, and I'm not that tall, but I feel like a giant.
Yeah.
So no, I did not blend them well, to answer your question.
Wait, okay. I have another question. Sorry.
No, that's fine.
So, okay, there was a study that they did, and I'm not properly citing my sources, but it was about kind of racial groups in schools. So this study was particularly with like white students and Black students. And they noticed that oftentimes people with different racial categories would hang out together. And they interviewed the students and they figured out that the Black students would hang out together because for them, it was a place that they didn't have to worry about race and they could just exist with themselves. And then the white students would hang out together. But they realized a lot of that also came from a place of exclusion, rather than having a place to just exist in their pure selves. And so oftentimes though, who gets labeled as like self-separating, right? Or who gets labeled as, oh, they're not sharing, is often put on the people of color. But I'm curious, like in your case, when you had your Asian friends and your white friends, did you feel as though like hanging out with some of them was a place to, find that comfort?
I mean, it was middle school. There was no place of comfort. Let's be frank.
Yeah, puberty makes everybody uncomfortable all the time.
It was not good. But I guess more so in high school, and this is very skewed because I went to a predominantly Asian high school. Like by predominantly, I mean by a wide margin. So it was hard to hang out with non-Asian people. But I'll say this, and then I'll go back and be like, well, is there even a chance to hang out with white people? No, there was. Okay, I'll say this. I do feel like when I was in high school and I had like made it through middle school and everything wasn't terrible in the end of the world. Apologies, middle schoolers, if you're listening. It will get better. Also, if you're listening, I have questions. But good for your parents, I guess. I don't know why you're listening, but thank you. We appreciate it. Sorry for the swears. Once I had made it through middle school and it wasn't so terrible and I had like found my group of friends in high school, I definitely worried less about racial identity because then it was just like, how do I be cool? Am I cool? Are we cool? We're definitely not cool. How can we feel cool? Can we be a little cooler?
Well, and race also then wouldn't be your defining feature if you were cool or not.
Yes, exactly. Like there were cool girls of all races, although again, predominantly Asian. But within that, there was like cool Koreans and cool Chinese. And so like that was sort of our, I guess, you know, segregating factor. But my group actually in that sense was pretty mixed. Like I had Chinese friends, Thai friends, Filipino friends. We were like a little pan-Asian group. And so it didn't feel necessarily like racially segregated, and also I went to like a magnet high school where it was just like nerds on nerds on nerds, and so we were segregated by our nerd type. So I'm actually probably a pretty terrible person to ask for this particular studying question.
So fair. But valid nonetheless.
Sure, thank you. Appreciate that.
What were all the different nerd types?
I mean, well, we didn't all recognize that we were nerds, obviously. We were geographic nerds, and by this, I don't mean geography. I mean where we were identified by where we like hung out at school, and that was in the math wing. Not because we liked math. It was just based on locker assignment. And so like 2 people were assigned to a locker there, and then somehow we kind of just all ended up there, and it was like an out of the way hangout spot where we could like take up a lot of space, and we weren't really that in the way, and we could like be loud and do whatever. And so we became known as the math wing crew, which I think speaks to
we had a reputation,
the nerdy level of my high school experience. There were, this typical like the theater kids, art kids, ROTC. There was like the track team, cross country. This is a cross country team, notoriously incestuous among themselves.
Why is that a thing?
I don't know. I mean,
is it the short shorts? Like, what is the appeal?
I couldn't tell you.
It's a universal truth.
It is a universal truth. I guess because they spend a lot of time going places for the running together. I don't really know.
It's the juxtaposition of the short shorts and the long distances.
Is there an algorithm for that where like at a certain point it just they cross and then love happens?
Maybe that's why it's called cross country. Because it's about love.
Yes. Oh, look, we cracked the code, guys. We did it. Yeah, there were like the cheerleaders and song girls. There was a typical, but like all of that, but a nerd version. How did we get here?
Brian, when you talk about your Hawaiian roots as a kid
who has never lived in Hawaii,
do you think it was a form of differentiation or a form of belonging to mention that? Like, because Hawaii is technically part of America.
Yeah. Okay. I have a lot of thoughts on this. I think like being a twin is interesting where your identity markers are also a shared thing.
Yeah.
You are publicly known as having someone else attached to you because you look like them, versus I feel like for a lot of other people, the idea of like identity and individuality are more like similar.
Right.
Versus like, how when you grow up having somebody who looks exactly like you, who's also good at very similar things, your sense of identity is going to be a little bit skewed. So I've had this weird relationship of both like really loving labels and also hating them at the same time. And so I think by mentioning this idea of like Hawaii, because we were the only ones in our area that I knew of that had this relationship, you also had control over the narrative as to what that meant for you, right? You were the one sharing that, but nobody could doubt you in that way, versus like oftentimes, right, like when other people have other Chinese experiences that don't necessarily align with yours, you can sometimes feel like it's inauthentic because it's different, even though right now that we have access to wide conversations, we know that's not true. But growing up, sometimes you do feel invalidated in that way. And so having, this relationship, quote unquote, to Hawaii, right, allows you to kind of, have that space, because it was, for a lot of people, this like fantasy realm. Because every time we go now, like last time I went, I didn't even go to the beach. Like we just hang out with our cousins and like
go to Costco.
And our grandmother was like one of 13, right? So like family reunions are like 200-300 people large. And you're just going back and seeing family, and that's that relationship. Versus like going back to like geographically where that space is. And so that's why, I feel like my relationship with the space is less about with the space and more about the people who are there. And I think that little asterisk, allows you to have both.
Mm.
And now that I get older, I do question. I was like, like, why, right? Why would I say that? And do I even have ownership in the ability to claim that now too?
I mean, two things, right? Like, I think that's super interesting about having a differentiator that then, like, essentially kind of denies other people the ability to put their assumptions on you, right? Because, like, they can draw from their own experiences of, like, what does it mean, other Chinese people? And then you're like, oh, but also Hawaiian. They're like, oh, I don't have a stereotype for that. I don't have a framework for thinking about that. I guess I have to actually, like, get to know Brian and take Brian for Brian and not just, like, put all of my own shit about Chinese people onto Brian because he has told me he also has connections to Hawaii. And so I think that's actually, like, really smart in some ways to just be like, hey, no, different. We're all different. And it's a quick shorthand. So kudos. And interesting for you to be in a space of self-reflection to be like, okay, but what actually is my claim to that? And what actually of it do I have ownership over? And, you know, part of me wants to say, like, you know, going back to, like, calling yourself an artist, like, if you feel it, it's yours. Like, that's yours to claim. It's yours to have ownership over, because there is also no one there to police that. Like, because the other thing of that, right, is you being like, well, my dad is from there, but, like, I didn't grow up there, and we go there and I have family there, but, like, what does it even mean? And, like, we're still Chinese from there. And it's just this whole other way to sort of, like, negate your own experiences and say, like, someone else is more valid because they're native Hawaiian or they grew up there or whatever. And so I would sort of push back on, like, if, you know, if you make art, you're an artist. If your dad is from Hawaii, you have ties to Hawaii, and, like, those are yours to claim.
Yeah, because then you get in this, like, endless cycle where you can't win.
Yeah, because, like, then who is ever enough? Like, are we only Chinese enough if we are native Chinese from China? Like, that can't be it.
Yeah.
That's the antithesis of why this show exists.
Some people have made claims with much less basis than you have.
Well, that's why I'm, like, kind of obsessed with, like, Hilaria Baldwin, who's like Alec Baldwin's wife, who's, like, she is, like, really, like, hamming up her Spanish heritage. Because it's, like, it's really cringe, but a small part of me, like, understands why she would want that. I know it's so different when it's, like, a different body, right, and different histories. But yeah, it's been such an interesting thing to witness, right? Like, especially how you said, like, someone calling you exotic, right, is not beautiful to hear when it's certain bodies saying it.
Yes.
But if somebody, but it really depends on context.
Totally. You reminded me of a friend of mine and also listener. Hi, Jasmine. Are you listening? This is about you. Haha, calling you out. She had a Chinese grandfather. Her dad was Hapa and her mom was white. And so she presents very white, but also grew up going to Chinatown. And Jasmine, just come on the show already. Come on the show. I want to talk about it. But I'm reminded of that, right? Because it's like, what is her claim? Or similarly, people that are like a quarter of something, like, what is their connection to that? And for everyone, it's different. Like, we don't know their connection, but, like, as kind of, you know, taking it off of Jasmine, love you. But, like, more broadly, when we think about, like, what do we accept societally? Like, what is enough to be counted? I mean, I think that's what you're getting at. Like, what is enough of the connection to Hawaii for it to, like, still be valid for you today without it being the sort of, like, no, not like other Chinese people. And how do you personally, as an adult, sort of, like, share or use that either as a tool to, like, get people to know you through genuine sharing, or as a tool for, like, I'm not what you think I am, or some other third, fourth, fifth version of that.
I think it is interesting is, like, now being in San Francisco, where the narrative that you build in your head when you don't grow up in a space like this and are now here is so wild, right? Like, when I'm here, my brother's not here, so I'm not a twin in the same way.
Oh, yeah.
That might be my identifier in other spaces, but not when I'm here. And when you're one of many Asian faces in a space too, completely different, right? I remember I started working at the same time with someone who had similar demographics as me. And I remember being like, at least for the first day, I was weirdly competitive, or like I felt like that was my thing.
Oh.
I was like, I'm the Asian kid. Like, that's me. Like, it was stressful to hear that. Then eventually you get over it. But I was like, what a childish thing to feel, right? Like, but similar to like conversation about labels, like, as much as I disliked that, I also like, yeah, it was your thing, right? That was your thing to claim. And so, yeah, when you're here, you can kind of just exist as a person. And to then unpack all of, yeah, like you're the same exact person, just the contexts have switched now that I'm here. And so I do notice myself talking a lot less about Asian identity because it's something you can just accept now with friends. Yeah, now, especially after college too, you have like, I remember in high school, you had your friends who were Asian. And now I have friends who are my friends that are also Asian. You know what I mean? Like the differentiation was different because I think the needs are different now too.
How do you eat with these friends?
Oh, we love to cook. That's the funniest thing. I now associate cooking with community in a way I didn't until like I've now been on my own. But like we would always, it was similar to your Pan-Asian crew. It was a lot of different backgrounds. But the one thing that every culture has is a dumpling. And so we would always, especially in college, like we would do dumpling nights. And it was like the best because everybody was active, everybody was working. And it was so beautiful to have that space where you're physically with each other. So if that's somebody's kind of like comfort space, you have that. But then it's also a beautiful space to like talk because you're like slightly busy with your hands. So I think I learned a lot about people as they were making it.
Yeah.
Or it's like when you're giving someone a haircut. I used to cut people's hair in college, which did not look good. But there was something nice about how much people would just open up to you. Because like everyone's just slightly busy.
Focused on something else.
Yeah. And you just heard people's like inner thoughts. And it was such a beautiful thing to have. And it's weird that it was just in that one context in which people would open up.
Well, and this actually brings me back to like you talking about being in the kitchen with your family and this, you know, seemingly like one person, long, slow Kalua pork recipe is actually like a very shared activity. And I wonder if that was a chance, and, you know, you were a kid, so maybe you are aware or not, but like if that was a chance for you as a family to kind of like open up a little bit more, or your mom or your dad could like ask you things that you couldn't ask sitting down at the table, or like just staring you in the face, or your siblings could connect in ways, you know, because you were like all a little bit busy and all kind of focused on a task, but you could also like ask a question here, ask a question there.
Yeah, I have two thoughts on that. One is like, so my mom said that her mother was her best friend. And I never got to meet my grandmother. But I'd always ask her, I was like, oh, what did you like doing together? And she was like, oh, we just put on like Wild Wild West. And our grandmother didn't speak English. But she just watched, sit in front of the TV, they sit next to each other. And they just like laugh at what was going on because it was like just like body comedy, right? And like that was always such a beautiful story to hear. And it just felt so pure, right? Of like, of what love looks like. And then I know every time I come back home now, the kind of connection that I want is always like verbal, right? It's like, I want to have deep, meaningful conversations. And then I talk to my mom and she's like, no, as long as you just sit next to me, right? Or as long as you guys are in the house, I'm happy. And so I've thought about like cooking is that space, right? Where you can have those conversations that get closer to kind of what I was looking for. And also you're just physically with each other. And so, yeah, that's one thing that I've really loved about it. And then in terms of like...
That's really beautiful.
And then in terms of like the kind of family dynamics of like politics that I was talking about earlier, like when you're making Kalua Pig, because everybody has a role in it, you also have your job and your tasks. So it becomes like Power Rangers at a certain extent, where it's like, yeah, everybody's bring to the table something different and all together creates this meal. And so especially when everybody has different, like they become the leader, right? The taste tester is the leader at that stage in cooking. You have your domain. And so it was a nice way to like not step on anybody's toes, but also like, yeah, to feel like you're all contributing.
Yeah.
But just in different ways.
Damn, Brian, I like that so much. This idea that like you all got to lead a certain aspect of it, and like that just makes for a more communal and contributive environment and experience. That's really lovely.
And a lot of like the nonverbal communication of a kitchen too, like when you're cooking, where like you're just moving around and no one has to say anything, but you know exactly like how other people, it's like dancing.
Mm-hmm.
You know how other people are going to move in that space. And so you just move with them. And it's like one of these unspoken things that is so beautiful. I just can't like capture that in any other way.
I love this so much. Oh, that truly, that's such a beautiful idea of you all dancing in the kitchen together, and just that like cooking is this sort of collective performance, not performative, but like a performance with each other. It's so lovely. And it actually really makes me want to like start cooking with our kids now.
It's really fun. And then when it comes to Thanksgiving, then you can plan out like, it's basically like a war room now, where we'll all get together and you will schedule every single thing you want to make, all the timing that needs to get done. And it's like so intense for no reason. But yeah, it is like, it's one of my favorite like team bonding activities that I look forward to every year.
Oh my God, I love that. That's amazing. A war room for no reason. Oh, so perfectly encapsulates Thanksgiving so well.
And that's before the guests come.
Right? Oh my God. Brian, this was super, super, super fun. Like, I know I say that on every episode, but I really genuinely, I've had a lot of fun with you today. I would like to keep talking, but for the sake of everyone, we should probably wrap up. Thank you for being here. This was such a nice experience. I have a new appreciation for elder Gen Zs. We have bridged that. We are mending generational fences or something, building bridges.
This is the future.
This is the future. Listen, millennials, old millennials, they're fine. Get a Gen Z. They're good.
Yeah, we're just anxious.
Yeah. Oh, we taught you that. It's fine. Brian, where can people find you on the internet if you would like them to find your work?
I post my artwork on Instagram at plan_Brian. So PLAN_BRIAN. And then my website is plan-Brian. So same thing, but the dash is moved up a little bit.
Nice. Amazing. Oh, that's the best way to talk about underscores and dashes. Moved up a little bit. Beautiful. Listeners at home, we will get a recipe up for Brian's family's Kalua pork. You can find it on our website at worstqualitycrab.com, or you can find us on Instagram, worstqualitycrab. And if you would like to email us for any reason, you can email us at worstqualitycrabpod@gmail.com. And let us know if you end up making this. I think this is definitely one that we are going to make and see how the kids like it, hopefully a lot. And if not, then we're just going to turn it into nachos for ourselves on the second day. And I have no problems with that. And they can eat mac and cheese.
It also feeds like 20, so invite a friend.
Yeah. No, that's fine. Could we freeze it? Does it freeze well?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay.
It freezes perfectly.
Beautiful. Perfect. Everybody, make a pot, then freeze it. It's great. Brian, thank you again for being here. It's been really great to have you.
Of course, I had the best time.
All right, everybody. We will talk to you next time. Bye.
Bye.